Where are they now? One-hit wonders. The songs that never left us, and the people who made them. Written by Barron Darby. Narrated by Jessica Ann Bogart. A note on this book. This is a book of biography, told with affection, and built entirely from the public record. Every person in it gave the world a song that refused to leave. What we do here is follow those songs past the moment we all remember, into the lives that kept going after the charts moved on. Some of these stories are triumphant, a few are hard. Where the record turns painful, we slow down and tell it gently, because the people in these pages are not punchlines. They are artists who handed us something we still hum, and they deserve to be met with respect. Nothing here is invented. Where a life ended, we mark it with care, the song that wouldn't leave. There is a particular kind of fame that lasts about 4 minutes and then lasts forever. You already know the feeling because it has happened to you in a parking lot. A song slides out of a speaker, and before the singer has finished the first line, you are no longer standing where your body is standing. You are inside a car you sold years ago. You are at a school dance in shoes that hurt. You are deep in a summer that smelled like chlorine and cut grass and somebody's borrowed cologne. Every word is right there, perfect, waiting. And yet the one thing that has vanished completely is the name of the human being doing the singing. They were everywhere once, for one blazing season, and then they were gone, and the song stayed behind like a coat somebody left at a party and never came back for. We call these people one-hit wonders, and we say it with a small, fond cruelty, as though one flawless song were somehow a failure. It is one of the strangest insults in the whole of music. Most artists who ever picked up a guitar in a cold garage would hand over their entire catalog, gladly, for 4 minutes that the whole world agreed to memorize. To write something a total stranger will sing in the shower 30 years on, in a country you have never set foot in a language you may not even speak, is not a small accident. It is closer to a miracle than to a mistake. This book is about the people standing on the far side of those songs. Not the song, the person, the voice you can summon in a heartbeat, but could not pick out of a grocery line. We are going to ask the one question the radio never bothers to answer. The question that has been quietly tugging at your sleeve for years. Whatever happened to them? The answers are going to surprise you repeatedly. Some of these artists never left at all and are out on the road this very year, singing the identical chorus to the grandchildren of the people who first loved it. Some looked at fame, decided it was a lousy trade, and walked off to find a quieter life, and found exactly that. A handful pulled off something far stranger and more wonderful than a second hit. They vanished from in front of the curtain and reappeared behind it, writing and producing the colossal songs you always assumed belonged to somebody far more famous, hiding in plain sight at the very summit of the business that supposedly chewed them up and spat them out. And some we have lost. We will say their names with the tenderness the moment asks for, and then we will step back and let the music have the last word. What ties all of them together is not failure. It is a single blazing instant of being exactly right, of catching something that was hanging in the air, that everybody could feel and nobody had yet named, and bottling it before it could float away. That instant does not come back when you call for it. Most of these people understand that better than anyone alive, and they have made a kind of peace with it that the rest of us could stand to learn from. So set the needle down in the groove. Let us go find out where they went, the early wonders. Before the music video, before the streaming chart, Before the algorithm decided what you were allowed to love, a hit traveled the only way it could, on the radio and in the grooves of a 7-inch single, and it could come from absolutely anywhere. A goat farmer, a school teacher with a strange poem about the future, a session singer knocking off a throwaway B-side in a single afternoon before lunch. The earliest wonders in this book had no machine humming behind them. They had a song, and one improbable stroke of luck, and then the entire rest of a long life to figure out what on earth to do with both. Norman Greenbaum. It begins with a guitar that sounds like it is being broadcast straight up from the afterlife, a fuzzed and holy growl crawling out of the speaker, and then a man starts to sing, cheerfully, calmly, about dying. Spirit in the Sky was a hymn built for people who never darkened the door of a church, and in 1969 it climbed to the top of the charts on both sides of the Atlantic, and then simply declined to leave, surfacing in films and commercials decade after decade, until it had quietly earned the strangest promotion in pop, from novelty to standard. Here is the joke that the whole world somehow missed. Norman Greenbaum, the man who wrote one of the most famous gospel songs in the entire American songbook, was a nice Jewish kid from Massachusetts. He had been moved, of all the unlikely things, by watching a country singer croon a gospel number on television one night, and he thought, with the lovely arrogance of a young man, that he could knock one of those out himself. So he sat down and did. It took him a few minutes. He had no idea he was assembling something that would outlive nearly everything else recorded that year, including most of the songs the critics took seriously. He never came anywhere close again, and the way he handled that is the heart of it. Greenbaum walked almost entirely out of the music business and became a dairy goat farmer in California, rising early to tend his animals, while his one perfect song quietly mailed him a check every time a movie needed 4 minutes of pure, ridiculous transcendence. He is alive today, in his early 80s, still in California, still good-humored about the whole improbable arc of it. When the song was given a deluxe reissue in 2025, he gave it his blessing and turned up for a cameo in its first ever official music video, more than half a century after he wrote the thing in an afternoon. A car accident a decade back slowed him down for a stretch, but he came through it. He remains, by every single account, exactly the sort of man you would want holding the deed to that song. Gentle, grateful, and still a little amazed it ever happened to him at all. Zager and Evans. In the summer of 1969, while the entire planet tilted its head back to watch men actually walk on the moon, the #1 record in America was not a celebration. It was a folk rock prophecy that calmly imagined the human race spiraling toward extinction across the next 10,000 years. In the year 2525 was strange, portentous, and enormous, a chart topper in both the United States and Britain, and it belonged to two friends from Nebraska named Denny Zager and Rick Evans. They had written precisely the song the moment seemed to be demanding, a dark hymn for a year that could not make up its mind whether the future was a triumph or a death warrant. And then, almost cruelly, the music left them just as fast as it had arrived. They never had another hit, not a modest one, not a single thing. They hold a peculiar and lonely record as the most complete one-hit wonder in the history of the charts, a band whose entire public existence was one song and then silence, and the partnership did not survive that disappointment for very long. From there, the two men's roads forked hard. Denny Zager turned his back on the stage and toward the workbench, and built something lasting with his own two hands. He founded Zager Guitars in Lincoln, Nebraska, designing and crafting custom acoustic instruments that are prized by players who have not the faintest idea their maker once sat at #1 in the country. He is at it still, in his early 80s, busy and well. His partner's story closes more softly. Rick Evans died in early 2018 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The song the two of them made about the distant future has now comfortably outlived its own century and will very likely outlive ours too, which is a fitting sort of immortality for a prophecy. One of its authors is still here, bending wood into music. The other we keep with us, with gratitude. Terry Jacks. Seasons in the Sun is a goodbye in disguise. Underneath that sunny, almost nursery rhyme melody, the kind you could hum to a toddler, is a dying man taking his leave of everyone he has ever loved, and in 1974 that bittersweet sleight of hand made it one of the best-selling singles on earth. The voice belonged to a Canadian named Terry Jacks, who had taken an old Jacques Brel song about a man's final hours and reshaped it into something the entire planet sang along to, without ever quite noticing how heartbroken it was. Jacks was no wide-eyed beginner. He had already tasted real success in Canada with the Poppy Family, the band he led alongside his then-wife Susan, well before his solo farewell became a global event. But it is what he did next that is worth carrying out of this chapter. Rather than chase the charts up and down like everybody else, he turned his attention to the water and the trees of the home province he loved. He became an environmental crusader, and not a ceremonial one. Troubled by the pollution sliding into the inlets of coastal British Columbia, he founded an organization called Environmental Watch and spent years documenting exactly what the pulp mills were doing to the air and the sea, work that earned him real recognition and, far more to the point, real results. The man who had sung the gentlest goodbye on the planet spent his second act fighting so that one particular stretch of coastline would live to say hello to another generation. He is in his early 80s now, and by every available account still bound up in both music and the environmental causes that became the deeper work of his life. The story does carry a quiet loss inside it. Susan Jacks, his former partner in the Poppy Family and in life, died in 2022, and any memory of those early harmonies now carries her absence folded into it. But Terry Jacks endures, a pop star who simply decided the planet was a better use of a famous name than one more single ever could be. Carl Douglas. A snapped, percussive shout punches out of the speaker, half martial arts holler and half dance floor cheer, and an entire decade announces itself in a single breath. In 1974, Carl Douglas had a #1 record in country after country after country, eventually moving something on the order of 11 million copies of a disco-funk novelty he had tossed off almost as an afterthought, a throwaway built to be the B-side of a single that nobody on earth now remembers. Douglas was a British-Jamaican singer, born in Kingston in the 1940s, a serious vocalist who happened to collide with the martial arts craze at the exact right instant, like a man stepping onto an escalator at precisely the second it lurches into motion. The song was meant to be filler. Instead, it became one of the defining pop curiosities of the entire decade, the rare record that every human being on the planet can imitate inside of 2 notes, complete with that little vocal hiccup that punctuates the chorus. He never matched it as a performer, and rather than wrestle with that fact, he simply stepped behind the curtain. Douglas relocated to Germany and built a steady, sensible career in music production, supplying songs for film and advertising, letting his one gigantic hit do the heavy lifting while he made an honest, unglamorous living well out of the spotlight. Today, in his early 80s, he lives in Hamburg, semi-retired, and entirely at peace with where he sits in this story. When the song hit its 50th birthday, he joined the celebrations and even cut a fresh, knowing version of it. There has always been a debate about whether the record traffics in cartoon stereotype, and that is a fair conversation to have, though most listeners have long heard it as affectionate camp rather than anything sharper. Douglas himself has always worn it lightly, the way a man wears a good suit he has owned for 50 years and knows, with quiet satisfaction, still fits. Rob Parisi. Play That Funky Music started as a heckle. As the story goes, a crowd at a club wanted a rock band to quit messing around and play something with some groove in it, and that shouted demand became, in the hands of Rob Parisi, a #1 record in 1976, and among the most durable crossover songs of its era. Parisi wrote it, sang it, and fronted the Ohio area band Wild Cherry. And for one shining stretch, he was, by his own cheerful admission in the lyric, the unlikeliest groove merchant in America. The band could not follow it. By the end of the 70s, Wild Cherry had quietly come apart, undone by the very thing every group on earth dreams of, a hit so enormous that nothing else they touched could climb out from under its shadow. But Parisi was a craftsman, not a fluke, and he did not simply evaporate. He reinvented himself as a writer and recording artist in smooth jazz, that polished and patient genre, and put out a run of solo albums a long way from the sweaty dance floor that had made his name. It was quieter work, slower work, and it suited the man. He stepped away from the business altogether around 2017 and now lives in Florida, retired, surfacing for the occasional interview to tell the old story one more time with good humor and zero bitterness. The hook that made him famous, that grinning confession of a kid stumbling into his own groove, has never curdled into anything mean, because it was never anything but the plain and joyful truth. Parisi laid down a single irresistible record and then, with admirable common sense, went off and built himself a life. The myth of the one-hit wonder. We should stop here this early and retire an idea before it does any more damage. The phrase one-hit wonder has a sneer tucked inside it, a quiet suggestion that the artist got lucky exactly once and spent all the rest of the time exposed as a fraud. Listen back over the first 5 lives in these pages, and that whole story collapses on contact. A goat farmer who wrote a gospel standard without believing a syllable of it. A guitar maker whose hands now build the very instruments that other people's hits get played on. A pop star who traded the stage for the front lines of an environmental war. A craftsman who slipped, unhurried, into smooth jazz. These are not cautionary tales. These are people who caught lightning one time and then went off and lived sensible, often genuinely admirable lives, which is a great deal harder and a great deal rarer than catching lightning twice. What the sneer keeps missing is the sheer size of the thing it is sneering at. The world is absolutely full of gifted musicians who labored for decades, paid every due there is, and were never once memorized by a single stranger. To be a one-hit wonder, you first have to pull off the nearly impossible feat of having the hit. Everything after that is just biography, and biography, as we are about to discover over and over and over, has a sly way of being far more interesting than any chart. Hold on to that thought as we step into the brightest, loudest, most overlit decade this whole collection will visit. The 80s are coming, and with them, the music video, which would take the humble one-hit wonder and turn it into something the world could not only hum, but watch. The MTV years. On a summer night in August of 1981, a cable channel flickered to life and aimed a music video straight at the nation's living rooms, and the one-hit wonder was never the same creature again. A song could no longer get by on a hook alone. Now it needed a face, a haircut, a single freeze frame the camera could brand onto a generation's memory. No decade before or since has handed us so many glorious, fondly mangled, instantly singable single hits, and the men and women who delivered them became, each for one bright season, the most familiar strangers on the planet. Doug Fieger and the Knack. The riff lands like a fist on a door, insistent, a little unhinged, and then a young man is hollering a girl's name across what feels like 6 straight minutes of power pop adrenaline with nowhere to put it. My Sharona sat at number 1 for 6 weeks in 1979 and finished as the biggest American single of its year, and for a few delirious months the music press, never famous for its restraint, was calling the Knack the new Beatles. They were a Los Angeles band built around the singer and songwriter, Doug Fieger, and they had the bad luck of being hyped past the point any group could survive the fall. The backlash came fast and it came nasty. Bumper stickers and an organized campaign devoted to taking the Knack down a peg, and the records that followed never found a way back over all that noise. The band cracked apart, reunited, cracked again, and the song quietly outlived the whole feud when a new generation rediscovered it in a movie about being young and going nowhere in particular. This one we tell as a tribute. Doug Fieger died in 2010 at 57 after a long fight with cancer, and the band's original drummer, Bruce Gary, had passed a few years before him. 2 of the 4 are still with us, carrying the memory of that impossible year. The song, for its part, refuses to age a single day. It still comes blasting out of car radios with every ounce of its original want and racket intact, a perfect piece of rock and roll made by a band the world adored, then turned on, faster than anyone's good. We choose to remember the love. The Vapors. 2 notes. That is all it takes. 2 notes of a coiled, jittery, perfectly anxious guitar figure, and an entire room will finish the phrase for you, because the opening of Turning Japanese lives somewhere permanent in the wiring. The Vapors were an English band out of Guildford, latecomers to the Amadeus revival, and in 1980 that song carried them clean to the top of the British charts and into the memory of everyone within earshot. A second one never came. By 1982 the band had dissolved, and their frontman and songwriter, David Fenton, did something nobody could have scripted. He enrolled in law school and became a music industry lawyer, spending his days on the dull, paper-strewn side of the business he had so briefly conquered. And then, decades later, the music came knocking again. The Vapors reformed in the middle of the last decade, and rather than simply cash the nostalgia check, they got genuinely busy, releasing a new album in 2025 and a fresh single late in the year, with Fenton out front and his own son now standing beside him on guitar. There has always been a rumor about what that famous lyric secretly means, a whispered theory the band has spent 40 years patiently swatting away. Fenton insists it was only ever a song about heartbreak, and at this stage of the man's life he has earned the benefit of the doubt. He is touring into this very year, a retired lawyer fronting the band of his youth, which is a sentence that ought to make anyone grin. Lips ink. A single rubber band bass line springs out of the speaker, and a sweet, beckoning voice extends an invitation to a place that exists nowhere on any map. For one shimmering stretch of 1980, the entire world said yes, and a record hatched in a Minneapolis studio went to number 1 across the globe, the perfect hinge swinging shut on the disco era, and open onto the synthesizer age about to dawn. The voice was Cynthia Johnson's, and the mind behind the whole contraption belonged to a multi-instrumentalist and former party DJ named Stephen Greenberg. It was, at bottom, a studio creation, one man's vision conjured into sound, and when disco ebbed, there was no obvious sequel of the same scale waiting in the wings. Greenberg stepped out of the light, and Johnson stayed rooted in the vibrant Twin Cities music scene that had raised them both. Both are alive and well, which deserves saying flatly, because the man who built Funky Town is sometimes spoken of in the past tense by people who have confused a musical legacy for an obituary. Greenberg, now in his mid-70s, gave a warm interview not long ago about how the record came together, and these days he divides his time and mentors younger musicians. Cynthia Johnson remains a fixture of the same Minneapolis scene that gave the song its heartbeat. Their Funky Town was always an invitation, and the people who issued it are still right here, still glad they did. Toni Basil. A cheerleader chant calls out a boy's name in a bright, taunting cadence, half pep rally and half come on, and in 1982 it became flatly inescapable. Driven by a video so instantly iconic, it practically taught the infant MTV what a music video could be. All pom-poms and pleated skirts, and a woman staring straight down the barrel of the lens. The song was Mickey, the woman was Toni Basil, and most of the world filed her away as a peppy pop singer and went on with its day. They had it precisely backward. Antonia Basilota was, and is, one of the finest respected choreographers and dancers in American entertainment, a serious artist who had spent years shaping how bodies move on film and stage before she ever cheered into a microphone. The pop hit was a lark, tossed off by a woman with a real and lasting craft. She never matched it on the charts, and she did not need to, because she simply walked back into the work that had always defined her. She is in her early 80s now, and very much alive, a fact worth underlining because a death rumor went around online in 2025 and was flatly false. She is here, still teaching dance workshops around the world, still razor sharp, honored in recent years for the songwriting and the choreography both. The cheerleader. The camera froze in 1982 turned out to be the most accomplished person in the room, a recurring theme in this collection and one of its quieter pleasures. Tommy Two-Tone. It is the most famous phone number in the history of pop music, 7 digits chanted like a secret, scratched onto 1,000 bathroom walls, and it belongs to a song about a girl named Jenny that the band Tommy Two-Tone wrote up the charts in 1981. The group borrowed its name from its lead singer, Tommy Heath, and the number burrowed so deep into the culture that actual human beings unlucky enough to own it have fielded crank calls for 40 years. There was no second smash, and Heath did not sit by the phone hoping for one. He went and became a computer analyst and software engineer up in Portland, Oregon, a working technologist who played gigs on weekends and on his vacations, treating the music as a beloved side road rather than a dead end. He still leads the band, out on nostalgia bills as recently as last year, and still writing new music in his later 70s. The most touching chapter has nothing to do with charts at all. A cancer support organization adopted a helpline built around that legendary string of digits, turning the era's catchiest novelty into a number a frightened person can dial for comfort, and the man who sang it has lent himself to the cause. A throwaway about a name and a number on a wall became, decades later, a small instrument of grace. Men Without Hats. The song opens by handing you a permission slip, a cheerful assurance that you are free to move however the spirit takes you, an answer to no one. The offer was extended in 1983 over a burbling synthesizer and inside a video crowded with a medieval village and a man leading a strange, joyful procession. And the safety dance became one of those songs that simply is the 80s, whenever a film or a commercial needs 3 seconds of the decade. The band was Men Without Hats, a Montreal synth-pop outfit founded and fronted by Ivan Dorshuk. They had another song beloved back home, but to the rest of the world they remain simply the Safety Dance Band, and they wound down in the early 90s as the new wave moment closed. Dorshuk, though, was not done, and over the last decade he revived the band in earnest. This is no nostalgia exercise. The current version is flat out busy, touring Canada, the United States, and Europe through the past year, putting out a live album and releasing a brand new studio record late in 2025, complete with a winking single in honor of the very decade that made them. Dorshuk fronts all of it, still inviting audiences to dance if they want to, an offer that has aged into something almost philosophical. The song was always about freedom, about the right to move however you please and apologize to no one. And 4 decades on its author is still happily taking everybody up on it. Modern English. The song makes a promise so enormous and so tender, it borders on the absurd, a vow to bring the whole spinning planet to a standstill and dissolve into the person beside you. Few sentiments in all of pop are as guilelessly, recklessly romantic, and the song that carries it, I Melt With You, has become a permanent fixture of weddings, films, and first dances, a sunlit new wave love letter from a band that started out making music far darker than you would ever guess. Modern English came up out of Colchester, England, on a famously moody independent label, and that one bright song eclipsed everything around it. They never wrote another like it, and they never had to, because that one quietly graduated into an institution, played at the most tender moments of strangers' lives in perpetuity. The original members drifted apart, and then, around 15 years ago, drifted back. The reunion stuck. The classic lineup is intact and active, releasing a new album in 2024 that folded in a freshly recorded version of their immortal hit, touring with the easy confidence of men who long ago quit worrying about repeating themselves. There is no shadow over this one, no tragedy to soften the edges, just 4 Englishmen who wrote one of the loveliest songs of their generation and have lived to keep playing it. The world they promised to stop and melt with is still turning, and they are still gladly threatening to bring it to a halt. Thomas Dolby. She blinded me with science. The word science lands in the song as a barked, gleeful exclamation, and the whole record is a piece of playful synth-pop mischief that made Thomas Dolby a fixture of the early MTV era and a top 5 name in America in 1983. Audiences filed him under novelty, a fellow in goggles fussing over a bank of keyboards, which was, yet again, a serious underestimation. Dolby was a genuine pioneer of digital music, an in-demand session player who turned up on records far more famous than his own and performed at Live Aid. When the hits dried up, he did not drift. He went to Silicon Valley and founded a technology company whose work helped create the polyphonic ringtone, which means that for years the chirping melody in millions of pockets was, in a quiet way, his second hit, one nobody knew to credit him for. Then he circled back to the music and to teaching it. Today he is a professor at the Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins University, directing its program in music for new media, and recently honored with an endowed chair. And he announced a short run of theater dates for the autumn of 2025. The man the camera once dressed up as a mad scientist proved to be something close to the real article, an actual inventor who shaped the sound of modern life and then went off to teach the next generation how it is done. Soft Cell, a weary, searching confession, opens the record, the sound of someone who loves too hard and aches to bolt from it all at once. Tainted Love stands as one of the defining electronic singles of its era, a haunted, pulsing reinvention of an old Northern soul number that became a transatlantic smash in 1981 and has not sounded dated for a single second since. It was the work of Soft Cell, the Leeds duo of singer Mark Almond and the man at the synthesizers, Dave Ball, two halves of one unmistakable sound. The pair split in the mid-'80s, reunited across the years, and kept the partnership breathing far longer than anyone would have wagered on a group the world first met through a single song. Almond built a long and admired solo career. Ball remained the quiet architect of the music. This chapter, like a few in this book, must be told as a remembrance. Dave Ball died in October of 2025 at 66, peacefully at his home in London, having finished work on a final Soft Cell album just 2 days before. Mark Almond is very much here, touring the United States this very summer and carrying that last record into the world as a tribute to his partner of more than 40 years. There is something almost unbearably fitting about a man completing his life's final work and then setting down his tools. The song the two of them made about love gone wrong would prove to be the opening note of one of the era's most loyal partnerships in British pop, and we honor the half of it we have lost. Dexys, Midnight Runners. Come on, Eileen. 2 words, a fiddle, a banjo, and a chorus that an entire planet has bellowed while pleasantly drunk at weddings ever since. The song topped the charts on both sides of the ocean in 1982, all overalls and Celtic soul abandon, and it made Dexys Midnight Runners and their restless leader Kevin Rowland briefly unavoidable. Rowland was never built for coasting. He is an artist of perpetual reinvention, forever tearing down whatever worked and starting again from bare ground. And the band fractured after its giant moment. While he moved through a hard personal stretch, he has since discussed with real candor. Plenty of people would have written the obituary of his career right there. Instead, he regrouped the band more than a decade ago, and he is still creating at a level that puts artists half his age to shame. Reclaiming the full original name, the group released a new album in 2025 that critics received warmly, an unflinching record about loss and reconciliation. With a tour of Britain and Ireland booked for 2026 and extra dates added by demand, Rowland has been open about the addictions and hard years behind him, and we take him at his own word and leave the details where he chose to leave them. What matters now is the plain, stubborn fact that the man is still standing at the front of his band, still making the music move. Nena. 99 balloons drift up into the sky and, in the logic of the song, are mistaken for an incoming attack, and one small misunderstanding tips the whole world into war. 99 Luftballons was a Cold War parable smuggled inside the catchiest record of 1983, sung in German by a young woman the world came to know simply as Nena, and it remains one of the decade's most successful German-language songs ever to conquer the global charts. In America, she is filed as a one-hit wonder, the woman behind the red balloons, but that has always been a parochial little view. In the German-speaking world, Nena, born Gabriele Kerner, never went anywhere at all. When her band split in the mid-'80s, she carried on as a major solo star, one of the finest and most enduring pop figures her country has produced. She is in her mid-60s now, and still a formidable live draw, touring across Europe with a long run of concerts, booked into 2026, and new material in the works. The anti-war anthem she sang as a young woman has lost none of its sting in a century that keeps grimly proving it right. What looks from one side of the ocean like a single bright flash was, from the other, the opening note of a career that simply never stopped, and she carries the whole of it lightly, still letting those balloons go up night after night. Falco, rock me, Amadeus. It should not have worked. A German-language rap-pop tribute to a long-dead classical composer. And yet in 1986, it became the only German-language song ever to reach #1 on the American charts, a feat nobody has matched in the decades since. The man behind it was an Austrian named Hans Holzel, who performed as Falco, and at home he was no novelty whatsoever, but the biggest pop star his nation had ever produced. The world beyond Europe never handed him another hit on that scale, and the pressures of fame bore down on him in ways he did not always manage to hide. He stayed a giant in the German-speaking world, while the wider spotlight wandered off, a complicated and gifted man hauling an enormous reputation behind him. His story ends too early, and we tell it gently. Falco died in early 1998, at just 40, in a road accident in the Dominican Republic, where he had been living. He was beloved in Austria then, and is revered there still, the subject of films and tributes that keep his memory bright a quarter century on. There were struggles in his life, and we leave them lightly touched, because the point is never how a man stumbled, but what he made. He made the most unlikely #1 in American chart history, and he made his small country proud, and both of those things have comfortably outlived him. Limahal. The chorus arrives all flutter and stammer, a bashful boy tripping over his own nerves in a glossy swirl of synthesizers. The new romantic single bounced its way to the summit of the British charts, and high into the American top 5 in 1983, polished to a sheen by one of Duran Duran's own, and it made a star of the bright-haired young singer fronting the band, Kajagoogoo. He went by Limal, a tidy anagram of his real surname Hamill, and for one moment he was simply everywhere. Then, abruptly, his own band sacked him, and he was a solo act before he had quite finished being a sensation. He landed on his feet with the soaring theme to a beloved children's fantasy film the very next year. But the wider spotlight soon dimmed, and he settled into the long, agreeable life of an artist cherished by one particular generation. He is still out there, performing across Europe and turning up wherever the 80s are being celebrated. And not long ago, he sang his signature hit on a major British telethon to a warm, roaring welcome. The firing that once stung has softened into just another well-worn chapter he tells with a shrug. There is a durable charm to the man, an obvious gratitude for the strange ride, and audiences who first loved that coy, whispering chorus as teenagers now bring their own children along to hear it. The song kept insisting he was too shy, yet he never really left the stage, and he seems genuinely glad of that. Taco, puttin' on the Ritz. In 1983, a young entertainer took a song Irving Berlin had written back in 1929, draped it in synthesizers and new wave cool, and carried it into the American top 5, an act of revival so successful that it briefly turned Berlin, then well into his 90s, into a charting songwriter all over again. The performer was Taco Okers, born in Jakarta and raised across Europe, a singer schooled in cabaret and theater, who simply went by Taco. It was a singular American moment for him, and afterward he returned to the European stages, the galas, and the theaters, where a polished entertainer can work steadily for decades without ever needing another chart hit. That is exactly what he did, quietly and well, for years on end. He lives in Germany today and performs regularly, and his old revival has lately enjoyed a revival of its own, embraced by a new generation on social media, which he has welcomed with good humor. One honest note belongs here. The song's original 1983 video included costuming that was rightly seen as offensive and was later re-edited to remove it. And Taco, a man of mixed heritage raised far from America, has said no insult was ever intended. We acknowledge it plainly and leave it there, because the lasting thing is the song, a sparkling, top-hatted update of a standard, and the genial veteran who is still, all these years on, happily putting on the Ritz, the trick of the frozen face. Here is the strange thing the music video did to all of us. It froze a face. Before MTV, a hit was a sound, and you could love a song for years and never once know what its singer looked like. After MTV, the song and the face fused, and the face that fused was always young, always caught at the single most camera-ready instant of an entire human life. Toni Basil will be forever cheering at 40. Falco will always be the sharp young man in the suit. The screen seized one frame and made it eternal, and then the person inside the frame went on quietly to grow older and stranger and more interesting than the image ever permitted. That is the small cruelty at the heart of this whole genre, and also its strange mercy. The world refuses to let these artists age. But the artists, of course, aged anyway, into professors and lawyers and choreographers and environmental crusaders, into grief and recovery and reinvention. The face on the screen stayed 25. The person walked out of the frame and lived an entire life, and it is that life, not the frame, that we keep coming back to find. The decade we turned to next traded the 80s gloss for flannel and feedback and a studied refusal to look like it was trying at all. But the 90s had its one-hit wonders too, and some of them were hiding the most astonishing reinventions in this entire book. The alternative nation. The 90s walked into the room in a thrift store cardigan and refused to make eye contact. The decade distrusted Polish the way the 80s had worshipped it. It dressed down, cranked the guitars until they fed back, and prized the appearance of not caring above nearly everything else, which made it a peculiar and fertile place for the one-hit wonder. A band could erupt out of total obscurity on a single song and then dissolve right back into the underground that spat it out. And here is the twist this chapter keeps springing on you. A few of the people who seemed to flame out fastest were not flaming out at all. They were walking, calm and unhurried, straight toward the center of the music business, the room behind the room, where the real power sits and the hits are quietly manufactured for everybody else. Linda Perry. It comes out of her like something tearing loose, a raw, wordless cry scraped from the bottom of the lungs at the center of What's Up, and in 1993, it turned a San Francisco band called Four Non-Blondes into an overnight sensation. The song became one of those communal anthems a whole bar will bellow at last call, arms around strangers, nobody quite on pitch and nobody caring. The voice, ragged and enormous, and impossible to mistake for anyone else, belonged to Linda Perry, the band's singer and chief songwriter, and the group essentially lived and died on that one towering album. You could file her under flash in the pan and move on. You would also be committing one of the great misjudgments in this entire book. Perry walked out of her own band and into the producer's chair, and there she did not merely survive. She became a colossus. She wrote and shaped era-defining hits for Pink and for Christina Aguilera, then went on to work with a roster of the biggest names in pop, so long it reads like a Hall of Fame guest list, eventually being inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame and standing as the first woman ever nominated, on her own, for the Producer of the Year Grammy. Let That Land. The woman behind one beloved 90s sing-along quietly established herself as one of the great important hitmakers of her generation. The hidden hand behind songs you would never, in 1,000 guesses, have pegged as hers, and she has stayed restlessly, almost stubbornly creative. A documentary about her life arrived recently and shook loose her first solo album in more than 20 years, while 4 Non-Blondes itself has reunited with fresh recordings planned. She has also spoken openly about a cancer diagnosis, framing it not as a tragedy, but as part of a creative rebirth, and we honor her own framing and leave it there. The one-hit wonder revealed itself to be a one-woman hit factory. Gregg Alexander. You get what you give. The New Radicals came barreling out in 1998 with a sunny, defiant anthem that built to a famous closing verse, where the singer cheerfully reads the rich and famous their rights, naming names, and for one bright moment, the band looked like the next inevitable thing. Then their leader did something that almost never happens. At the absolute crest of the song's success, with the waves still rising under him, Gregg Alexander broke up the band and walked away. He had decided, plainly, that he preferred writing songs to being a star, and he was not bluffing. Alexander vanished from the front of the stage and reappeared, invisibly, all over the charts. He co-wrote a Grammy-winning hit for Santana, crafted songs for an international roster of pop singers, and earned an Academy Award nomination for a song in a film about, fittingly enough, the purity of making music for its own sake. He remains famously private, a man who chose the shadows on purpose and has never once acted like he regretted it. The viral resurgence of one of his compositions in a recent hit movie brought him a fresh industry honor, and the New Radicals briefly reassembled for a single notable performance not long ago, a rare sighting that sent fans into a happy frenzy. But mostly he has stayed exactly where he wanted to be from the start, behind the curtain, letting the songs do all the public-facing work, while the man who wrote them keeps his quiet. The world looked at him in 1998 and saw a casualty. It was looking at one of the industry's secret architects, Dan Wilson. Closing time. Every bar in America empties out to it, the gentle last call benediction that tells the stragglers, with a kind of bouncer's tenderness, that they do not have to go home but they cannot stay here. Semisonic owned the hit in 1998, and most people never bothered to learn the name of the man who wrote and sang it, a Minneapolis songwriter named Dan Wilson, or the soft secret folded inside it. The song about an ending is also a song about a beginning. Wilson wrote it as his daughter was on her way into the world. Like the two artists just ahead of him in these pages, Wilson took a single hit and turned it into a master key. He became one of the most sought-after co-writers in all of popular music. The steady, generous presence in the room behind some of its most towering songs. He helped write a Grammy-winning anthem of defiance for the Chicks, then co-wrote and produced on the album that detonated Adele into a global phenomenon, including a breakup ballad as quietly devastating as any the century has produced. He is still at it, a Grammy-winning writer working with the very biggest names while quietly releasing his own records on the side. And Semisonic itself remains alive and touring. By now a pattern is forming that you simply cannot unsee. 3 of the 90s' supposed one-hit wonders, back to back to back, turned out to be among the most influential songwriters of the whole era, hiding in plain sight in the fine print of everyone else's masterpieces. We will pull over and marvel at that properly in a moment, because it deserves it. Deep Blue Something. The premise of the 1995 hit Breakfast at Tiffany's is so sweet, it is almost a dare. A couple stands at the cliff edge of breaking up, scraping around for one single thing they still have in common, and what they find is a shared fondness for an old Audrey Hepburn movie, and they decide, against all odds, that maybe that is enough to stay. Deep Blue Something, a band of brothers out of Dallas led by Todd and Toby Pipes, rode that jangly little scrap of tenderness up the charts and into the permanent furniture of 90s memory. They never landed another hit anywhere near its size, but they also never truly broke up, which turns out to be a quiet triumph of its own. The band kept its core intact straight through the unglamorous decades, content to be the people who made one perfect, gentle song rather than burning themselves out, chasing a second. They are still together and still playing, with a current lineup, a recent album, and a steady run of shows around their Texas home and beyond. The 30th anniversary of their hit slipped past not long ago, and the song is, if anything, more beloved now than the day it arrived. The kind of record that gets handed down like a family recipe. Their whole story is a small, pointed argument against the tyranny of the follow-up. Sometimes one song about choosing to stay is exactly enough, and the people who made it get to simply keep going, unbothered and undramatic, doing the thing they love. Marcy Playground. A drowsy half-whisper drifts in on a haze, naming the two intoxicating things in the air with the cool detachment of someone murmuring from the next room of a long summer afternoon. And Sex and Candy became the defining sound of Slacker, 1997, parking itself at the top of the alternative chart for a then record stretch of weeks. The song was essentially one man's vision, the singer and guitarist, John Wozniak, who built Marcy Playground around his own dreamy, deadpan way of writing. The band could not summon another cultural moment of that exact size, but Wozniak kept the project breathing and also slid into writing music for film and television, the patient behind-the-scenes craft that has quietly sustained so many of the artists in this collection. Marcy Playground endures today as a trio, still recording and still touring, if on a smaller and more sporadic orbit than in their brief heyday. Anniversary reissues of that hazy hit have introduced it to listeners who were not even alive when it first floated out of a car radio. Wozniak made a single as drowsy and atmospheric as a hot day with nothing whatsoever to do, and he has spent the years since tending it and adding to it, a working musician rather than a museum piece, which is all any of them ever truly hoped to be. Harvey Danger. The chorus arrives like a shrug that has been holding its breath, the wry admission of someone who is not exactly sick and not exactly fine either. Flagpole Sitta was a frantic, witty burst of post-grunge nerves in 1997, the kind of song that makes you grin and clench your jaw at the same time. And it stamped the Seattle band, Harvey Danger, permanently onto the decade's soundtrack. It later found whole new audiences as a television theme, and more recently, inside a hit streaming series. The band was fronted by the sharp, literate singer, Sean Nelson. They never quite caught that same lightning twice, broke up around the turn of the millennium, reunited briefly, and finally went their separate ways for good. Nelson is alive and busy, teaching in a university songwriting program, writing thoughtfully about music, and recording his own albums for a devoted handful who treasure them. This chapter carries a loss, and we mark it gently. The band's co-founder and bassist, Aaron Huffman, died in 2016 at 43 after a long struggle with cystic fibrosis. Beyond the band, he was an admired art director in the Seattle press, a creative force well past the reach of his music. A 30th anniversary reissue of one of the band's records appeared recently, keeping the work in the light, and the surviving members carry his memory forward with them. The song still sounds exactly like being young and over-caffeinated and faintly terrified of the future, which is to say it has not aged a single day, and we play it now with a little extra gratitude for the friend who helped make it. Chumbawamba. The chorus is a tiny anthem of resilience, the sound of someone hitting the floor and bouncing straight back up, again and again, refusing on principle to stay down, which is precisely the joke buried inside it. Tubthumping was the unkillable pub anthem of 1997, a global smash that came of all the unlikely places from a veteran collective of British anarchist musicians who had been making fiercely political music for years before the wider world had the faintest idea they existed. That is the secret nearly everyone missed at the time. Chumbawamba were no novelty act. They were a long-running cooperative with deep and genuine convictions, and they took their improbable moment in the commercial sun and used it to needle the powerful before slipping back to the folk and protest music that was their actual life. They finally disbanded around the end of 2012, after roughly 3 decades together, on nobody's terms but their own. The collective is gone, but its members are very much alive and busy with exactly the kind of second acts you would expect from people that restless. One has become a touring author. Another fronts a post-punk band and made a documentary about the whole improbable saga. Another became a television writer. They gather now and then to reflect on the strange ride they took. The world remembers them for one irrepressible chorus about hauling yourself back up, never once suspecting it was sung by people who had spent their entire lives refusing, on principle, to stay down. The song was a thesis statement disguised as a sing-along. Most of us just danced. Fastball. You can hear it the instant it starts, that restless mariachi-tinged rock shuffle, and then the strange and lovely story unspools. The Way, the 1998 hit by the Austin trio Fastball, grew from something true and quietly haunting. An elderly couple climbed into their car, drove off, and simply vanished, and the song reimagines their disappearance as a romantic flight into the unknown, rather than the tragedy it actually was. They managed a smaller follow-up, but never recaptured that peak, and there the familiar story would end. Fastball, though, flatly refused to stop being a band. The same 3 founding musicians who cut that hit have stayed together for more than 30 years. A loyalty almost unheard of in a business that runs on breakups, the way an engine runs on fuel. They are still going, the original trio intact, having put out a well-received new album recently and toured the country, including stretches opening for far bigger acts who came up in their long wake. One of them said not long ago that the band had never been better at what they do, and there is no reason on earth to doubt him. Their one famous song was about people vanishing down an open road into mystery. The men who made it did the precise opposite. They stayed together, doing the work, year after unglamorous year, which in the end is its own kind of romance, the unflashy kind that actually lasts. 6pence, none the richer. Kiss me. 2 words, breathed over a guitar so light it barely touches the ground, and suddenly a whole generation's tenderest movie moments had their soundtrack. 6pence, none the richer floated that gentle 1998 single into total ubiquity, carried along by a hit teen film and the era's most swooned-over television romances, and the delicate voice at its center belonged to the singer Leigh Nash, with the songs written by her bandmate Matt Slocum. The band, which had roots in Christian rock before crossing into the mainstream, managed one more notable hit and then quietly came apart in the middle of the next decade. Nash went off to build a solo career leaning toward country and Americana, her clear voice finding new rooms to fill with that same unhurried glow. The story has a happy turn waiting in it. The band has reunited and is active again, with a new record, a first live album, and touring that has set them back in front of audiences who never once stopped loving that whispered invitation. The song they are best known for is barely a song at all, more like a held breath, 2.5 minutes of pure romantic hush, and it has scored 1 million first kisses in the years since. The people who made it have found their way back to one another, which feels like precisely the right ending for a band whose biggest hit was about closeness. Eagle Eye Cherry, a warm, strummed plea opens the record, the soft urging of someone who wants to hold a fleeting night together a little longer and keep the dawn at bay. It grew into one of the great sing-alongs of 1997, an acoustic embrace of a song that seemed to belong to everyone the very second they heard it. The voice was Eagle Eye Cherry, a Swedish singer-songwriter born into music royalty, the son of the celebrated jazz trumpeter Don Cherry, and the half-brother of the pop star Nene Cherry. The wider world never handed him another hit on that scale, though he never truly stopped, releasing albums to a loyal following mostly outside the United States, and weathering the stretches of doubt that come to any artist living in the long shadow of one beloved song. Recently, he answered the question of where he had gone in about the most graceful way an artist can manage, by quietly putting out a new record marking a quarter-century since his hit, and touring Europe behind it. He lives a settled life in Stockholm, far from the noise, a working musician with a famous family name and one indelible song entirely his own. Save Tonight was always about gripping something good while you still can, and there is a fitting symmetry in the fact that its maker has held on to the music, to a low-key contentment, to a career built patiently around a single perfect night. He invites his audiences to relive again and again. Tracy Bonham. A cathartic scream tears across the record, half phone call home and half full-blown exorcism. The sound of a daughter demanding at the top of her lungs to finally be heard. That detonation of 1996 announced Tracy Bonham as among the most ferocious new voices of the decade, earning her 2 Grammy nominations and a place at the very summit of the rock chart that, for a solo woman, would stand unmatched for nearly 20 years. Classically trained on violin, she was an artist of real range hiding inside one detonating single, her hit, Mother, Mother. She never repeated that commercial peak, but she did something quietly admirable instead, building a long and respected career across rock, folk, and collaborative orchestral work, the kind of durable musical life that never once depends on the charts to validate it. She lives and works in Brooklyn now, and released a new album recently, still creating, still genuinely curious about what comes next. Her present-day story carries a hard chapter she has chosen to share openly. Diagnosed with breast cancer in 2024, she came through surgery and treatment and has spoken about being cancer-free, performing again within weeks, turning a frightening year into a public testament to resilience. We honor her own candor and frame it exactly as she does, not as misfortune, but as proof of her toughness. The woman who once screamed down the phone at the entire world turned out to have precisely the kind of strength that song always promised, and she is putting it to use still. Tonic, a warm, surging rock ballad, opens with a lover's urgent wish that the rest of the world could witness the way he is loved. If You Could Only See was by one measure the single most played song on all of American rock radio across 1997, the kind of inescapable anthem that defines a year without ever quite turning its makers into household names. The band was Tonic, fronted by the singer and songwriter Emerson Hart, a Los Angeles group that for a stretch looked genuinely poised for a long reign at the top. A few more rock radio singles followed, but nothing recaptured that peak, and Hart eventually drifted toward a solo career and the steady, respected craft of Nashville songwriting, the trade that has quietly kept the lights on for so many of the artists in these pages. Tonic is alive and active, out on tour through this year and into the next, with Hart still writing, and the band still pulling in the audiences who fell hard for that big-hearted ballad the first time around. Theirs is one of the unfussy, untroubled stories these pages are glad to make room for, a group that made one enormous radio staple, weathered the years without drama, and simply kept playing. Not every artist needs a tragic arc or a jaw-dropping reinvention to be worth finding again. Sometimes the answer to where are they now is the most satisfying answer of all. Still here, still touring, still good at the thing they were always good at. Tal Bachmann. A soaring, falsetto-laced chorus drifts up the record, the sound of a man gazing helplessly upward at a woman who feels impossibly far above his reach. She's So High climbed the charts in 1999. A gleaming piece of power pop yearning from a Canadian singer named Tal Bachmann, who happened to carry one of rock's most storied surnames as the son of Randy Bachman of Bachman Turner Overdrive. For one bright year, that ascending hook was simply everywhere you turned the dial. He did not sustain a solo pop career past it, and for a long stretch, the obvious question hung in the air. Where exactly had he gone after that one luminous single climbed so high and then quietly drifted out of view? The answer turns out to be lovely in its own right. Tal Bachman now performs as a member of Bachman Turner Overdrive, playing alongside his own father, the two of them sharing a stage and a legacy that runs in the blood. There is something quietly moving in it. A man whose own famous song was about gazing up at something impossibly out of reach ends up standing right beside the rock and roll father, whose name he had been carrying all along. The hit made him briefly a star on his own terms, and the years since have folded him back into a family band, which may be a happier resolution than another solo smash could ever have given him. Blind Melon. A lazy, aching melody ambles in alongside an offhand confession that the singer's own life is nothing much to look at, ordinary to the point of invisibility. No Rain ambled up the charts in 1993, but what truly seared it into memory was the video. A chubby little girl in a bee costume tap dancing through an unkind world in search of others like herself. An image so tender, it became a whole generation's shorthand for not belonging anywhere. The band was Blind Melon, and at its heart stood a magnetic, troubled singer named Shannon Hoon. The song made them platinum stars, but the spotlight pressed hard on Hoon, who had long wrestled with addiction, even as the band tried to follow its breakthrough with a darker, less commercial record. This story turns on a loss we tell plainly, and with care. Shannon Hoon died in October of 1995 of a drug overdose on the band's tour bus in New Orleans at just 28, only months after the birth of his daughter. He was not a punchline. He was a gifted young father undone by a disease, The band scattered for years afterward, but the surviving members eventually found their way back, and today, with a singer named Travis Warren out front, Blind Melon is on the road once more, having returned in 2025 after a long quiet. They carry Hoon's memory with them every single night, and that bee-suited little girl still dances on, still searching for her people, in a video that has been quietly comforting the lonely for 30 years. Crash test. Dummies. The wordless hook is so odd and so adhesive that it conquered the world in 1993 almost against its own will. 3 short verses about children marked by strange misfortune, delivered in a cavernous baritone unlike any other voice anywhere on the radio. That voice belonged to Brad Roberts, the singer and songwriter of the Canadian band Crash Test Dummies. The peculiar song was a giant international success, and while nothing afterward repeated its reach, Roberts kept the project alive across the decades, weathering some health difficulties without ever quite stepping away from the music for good. He is living and busily touring today, having carried the album that holds that famous hum back around the world for its 30th anniversary, with dates running through recent years and into 2026, plus a retrospective collection that included his first new songs in 15 years. There is a particular pleasure in watching a song this strange refuse to die, a rumination on childhood bad luck wrapped around a hook that is barely even language, and in discovering that the deep-voiced man who wrote it is still out there singing it, still delighting whole rooms with the oddest hit of its year. He turned a curiosity into a livelihood, and the livelihood is humming along just fine. Primitive radio gods, a sampled blues cry lifted from a B.B. King record, drifts across a cool, mournful haze, the ageless lament of a man who has been low and lovesick since the very first day he laid eyes on her. The 1996 hit with the wonderfully unwieldy title, the one about standing outside a broken phone booth with money in your hand, topped the alternative chart and became a perfect, mysterious mood unto itself. And behind it stood a man named Chris O'Connor. His backstory is among the very finest in this book. O'Connor was working as an air traffic controller near Los Angeles, guiding planes safely down out of the sky one after another, when the homemade album that contained his hit unexpectedly took off without him, and the surreal double life of an aviation professional with a chart-topping alternative single must have been a genuinely strange thing to live through. No second hit followed on that scale, and he made his peace with that the best way imaginable, by simply continuing to create on his own terms, releasing new songs as recently as the past couple of years, a short collection at the close of 2024, and an album the year after. It is more a recording project than a touring act now, a quiet, persistent labor of love rather than a chase after old glory. The man who once talked airplanes down to the runway made a single perfect haunted record, and he is still, decades later, quietly making more of them, answering to no one on earth but himself. Chesney Hawkes. The chorus is pure, undiluted, youthful defiance. A teenager planting his flag and declaring himself utterly singular, like nobody else who has ever lived. In 1991, a 19-year-old sang it straight up to the top of the British charts, where it sat for 5 weeks, and on into the American top 10, a soaring anthem of self-belief drawn from a film in which he starred, his hit, The One and Only. His name was Chesney Hawkes, the son of a 60s pop musician, and for one dazzling moment, he was the whole future arriving early. The follow-ups never recaptured that first towering success, and the world tucked him away as the one and only fellow, a single brilliant hit, and then a question mark, the most familiar arc in all of these pages. He has answered that question emphatically of late. He turned up as a housemate on a major British reality show in 2025, released a new album that a national radio station crowned its record of the week, and has concert dates booked well into the years ahead, a working musician fully back in the thick of it. There is a neat justice tucked inside the story. The teenager who declared himself the one and only, with all the brash certainty of being 19, has grown into a seasoned performer who has earned the title honestly, not on the strength of one lucky hit, but through the long, stubborn persistence of actually sticking around. He meant the boast at 19. Past 50, he has made it true, the ones who became the hit factory. Stop for a second and consider what we just watched happen. 3 times in a row, right at the top of this chapter, we met an artist the world had written off as a single-song fluke, and 3 times the truth proved to be very nearly the opposite. Linda Perry, Gregg Alexander, Dan Wilson, each one took a lone famous hit and parlayed it not into a second hit, but into something far more powerful and far harder to see. They went behind the glass, into the producer's booth and the songwriter's room, and from there they shaped the soundtrack of the next quarter century. The breakup ballad that wrecked you, the defiant anthem you played to feel brave, the pop smash you assumed belonged entirely to the superstar singing it. Read the credits closely, and you keep tripping over these same supposed one-hit wonders, hiding right at the top of the mountain. It scrambles the whole idea beyond repair. We pity the one-hit wonder because we picture the music abandoning them. But for these 3, the hit was never the peak. It was the door. They walked through it and into the engine room of popular music, and they have been quietly running the machinery ever since, writing the very hits that other people get to be famous for. So the next time someone reaches for the phrase as an insult, remember that some of the most successful people in the entire industry started out wearing exactly that label and wore it all the way to the bank in the Hall of Fame. Now we turn from the guitars to the dance floor, where the beat was king. The parties were enormous, and some of the biggest voices of all, as we are about to see, were never even permitted to show their faces. The dance floor. Picture the night at its lowest ebb. The floor has thinned, the bar has slowed, and somewhere a DJ is staring at a room that has stopped moving. Then the right record drops, and the whole place jolts back to life as one creature with 100 legs. These are those records, not the ones you analyze, the ones you obey. They detonate at weddings. They turn a stadium of strangers into a single swaying organism. A DJ reaches for them the way a doctor reaches for the paddles, and the night sits straight up. They are the foolproof, surefire, everybody already knows the words anthems of hip-hop, dance, and pure pop. And tucked behind several of them is a secret this chapter has been waiting to tell about the colossal voices the industry was happy to use and then desperate to hide. Vanilla Ice. 2 seconds of bass line, and a room knows exactly where the night is going. That bass line, of course, did not belong to him, which is the whole comedy and the whole lawsuit rolled into one. In 1990, Robert Van Winkle, working as Vanilla Ice, rode Ice Ice Baby straight to the top and became the first rapper in history to hold the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100. For one over-caffeinated year, he was the grinning face of crossover rap, moving records by the truckload. Then the reckoning showed up swinging, over a backstory that had been buffed a little too brightly, and a sample nobody had asked permission to borrow. The fall was loud, fast, and public, and most people assumed it was the end of the real. It was not. Van Winkle resurfaced in the last place anyone would have looked for him, holding a nail gun. He became the easygoing host of a long-running show about flipping houses and built a real business as a contractor and real estate investor along the way. He is, by every measurable yardstick, doing just fine. A reported fortune in the tens of millions. A steady parade of television projects, documentaries, and a biopic all in motion. He made peace with the old controversies ages ago and tells those stories now with a shrug and a grin, the man laughing loudest at himself. The kid the culture loved to dunk on turned out to have a thick skin and a sturdy trade, swinging a hammer on cable while that undefeated bass line thumps somewhere on the planet every single night. He got the last laugh, and he is downright gracious about it. Tag team. The scoreboard freezes, the crowd needs a jolt, and the arena speakers cue it up before anyone has to think. A triumphant shout goes up, the sound of a thing finally arriving exactly where everyone wanted it. By now, the 1993 bass anthem, Whoomp, There It Is, has burrowed so deep into American sporting life that it no longer behaves like a song at all. It is a reflex, a national twitch. Tag Team, the Atlanta duo of Cecil Glenn and Steve Gibson, built it, and then got to watch it become one of the finest licensed, most bellowed party records ever committed to tape. There was never a follow-up to match it, and there did not need to be, because the song turned into a pension that pays out at full volume. It surfaces at games, in commercials, including a beloved run of ads that handed it to kids who had no clue the thing was older than their parents' marriage. The two men never had to wrestle the one-hit wonder label to the ground. The hit kept cutting its own checks. Both are alive and still working the room together, out on nostalgia bills, booked to join another beloved act's anniversary tour this year. Theirs may be the most untroubled story in this whole collection. Two friends who are still friends, still showing up to lead the chant. There is something genuinely restful about a tale with no shadow lurking in it. They engineered a record for exactly one job, to make a room erupt on command, and decades later it still does precisely that, every single time, no exceptions. Sur Mix-a-Lot. The first line lands like a dare, and the whole party leans in. The opening is an unapologetic, grinning declaration of exactly what kind of figure the rapper prefers, stated flatly, and without a shred of shame. It is arguably the most famous opening couplet in all of novelty rap, and Baby Got Back, the 1992 juggernaut from Seattle's Anthony Ray, won a Grammy, topped the chart, and got sampled, parodied, and quoted until it dissolved into the language itself. The world stamped Sir Mix-a-Lot as a one-joke man, which, as is the pattern in these pages, badly underestimated him. He was a real pioneer of Pacific Northwest hip-hop with an actual catalog behind him. But nothing he made could pull free of the gravity of that one enormous, irresistible single. And after enough years of trying to outrun it, he stopped running and settled comfortably into television, hosting, and the long, lucrative afterlife of his anthem. He turned 62 last year and still takes the stage, and although he has not dropped major new music in over a decade, his signature record found a brand new crowd among young people who rediscovered it and claimed it as their own. He has dabbled in home renovation television and even an improbable board game collaboration, carrying his legacy with humor and zero strain. The song the culture once shelved as a punchline has proven one of the great durable party anthems ever pressed, and the man behind it seems perfectly happy being its caretaker, a Seattle elder statesman of a hook the whole world can still rattle off from memory. Rob Bass and DJ EZ Rock. It takes two to make a thing go right. The 1988 record by Rob Bass and DJ EZ Rock is one of those perpetual motion machines, a platinum, soul-sampled engine of joy that helped shove hip-hop into the mainstream and has been hauling crowds to their feet for nearly 40 years. Behind it stood two Harlem kids who had been classmates first and stars second, Robert Ginyard and Rodney Bryce, friends long before the world knew either name. They never caught that same crossover lightning twice, but the song asked for no sequel. It simply installed itself at every gathering that wanted to feel alive. This chapter, with great sorrow, has become a remembrance of both of them. DJ EZ Rock died in 2014 at 46 of complications from diabetes, and while this very collection was being written, word arrived that Rob Bass had died too in May of 2026 at 59 after a private fight with cancer just days past his birthday. His passing is very fresh, and we hold it with open hands. His team remembered him as a loving father, a devoted family man, and a creative force, and he was every bit of that. The man who handed the world one of its most joyful, most enduring invitations to move. The two friends from Harlem are back together now, on the far side of the song they built, and the floors they once filled will go on filling for as long as anyone still wants that old, uncomplicated joy. It does take two. We are grateful for them both. Coolio. The first line carries the weight of scripture, a young man describing his passage through a landscape shadowed by death itself. Not many opening lines in popular music carry that kind of gravity. Gangsta's Paradise, raised on a Stevie Wonder melody for a 1995 film, was no party starter at all, but a grave, towering meditation on violence and fate. It won a Grammy and stands as one of the defining songs of its decade. The man who made it was artist Leon Ivy Jr., known to the planet as Coolio. His career ran far wider than that one monument, with other records, and later a warm second life as a reality television and cooking personality, a man whose easy charm earned him a standing invitation into America's living rooms long after the charts had moved along. The rest we tell with care. Coolio died in 2022 at 59 in Los Angeles, an accidental overdose, and we leave the particulars there because they are not the measure of the man. There is one detail in the timing that lands like a held breath. Just months before he died, the video for his greatest song crossed 1 billion views, a number that would have sounded like science fiction back when he first walked through that valley in the studio. He lived to watch his masterpiece reach 1 billion people. That is the image to keep. Not the ending, but the staggering reach of the thing he made. A song about death that would prove to be one of the most fiercely, defiantly alive recordings of its era. Snow. The needle drops and a tumble of dance hall syllables comes spilling out, gorgeously, gloriously impossible to parse. The opening of the 1992 hit is among the most cheerfully unintelligible passages in all of pop, and it carried Informer to 7 weeks at number 1, the highest charting reggae record in American chart history, sung, of all people, by a white kid from Toronto named Darren O'Brien, who went by Snow. By the middle of the decade, the world had filed him under, finished. The world filed too soon, though his return took a winding road. Snow kept right on recording, especially overseas, working far outside the American spotlight that had briefly blazed across him, a touring artist rather than a faded memory. Then, decades on, came one of the great surprise sequels in this whole book. In 2019, a global smash by Daddy Yankee reworked his old hit and put Snow himself right back in the frame. And just like that, he reappeared on the American chart for the first time in roughly 25 years, embraced by listeners who had not been born when he first topped it. His signature song has since been inducted into his country's Songwriters Hall of Fame, and he has been building new material with fresh collaborators. A father and grandfather now, he gets the rare and lovely privilege of being rediscovered while he is still around to enjoy it. The one-hit wonder who quietly waited out the years until his moment came circling back to him. Los del Rio. You know the dance. Don't pretend you don't. You have done it at a wedding, against the firm advice of your own dignity. Arms out, hips swiveling, equal parts sheepish and delighted. The Macarena, in its 1996 remixed form, became one of the best-selling singles in history, and a worldwide fever that briefly seemed to seize the entire species. And here comes the twist almost nobody clocked at the time. The two men behind it were not fresh-faced pop kids, but a Spanish flamenco pop duo, Antonio Romero and Rafael Ruiz, who had been performing together since the 1960s. They were veterans of decades when the bolt finally struck, seasoned entertainers hurled into a tier of global novelty fame that no amount of stage time could have braced them for. Internationally, they stayed a one-song phenomenon, but at home, they were respected lifers, and they took the whole surreal carnival in stride. Both men are still living and, astonishingly, still performing their inescapable hit into recent years, though they have reached an age, one in his late 70s and the other well into his 80s, where each fresh appearance feels like a small miracle. They release the occasional new song and keep on embodying the strange grace of their story, two lifelong musicians who paid 30 years of dues and were rewarded, late, with one of the biggest dance records the planet has ever produced. The Macarena will outlive every one of us, and its makers got to savor each absurd, joyful minute of it. Hadaway. What is love? The question has been hanging in the air since 1993, kept aloft as much by the song's own throbbing Eurodance pulse as by a certain comedy sketch in which two men in suits bob their heads to it for all eternity. The voice belonged to Nestor Hadaway, a Trinidadian-American singer based in Germany, and the record hit #1 across more than a dozen countries, a defining anthem of the era's dance pop. He never matched its global reach, but he eased into the steady, sustaining life of a European touring and recording artist, comfortably out of reach of any one-hit wonder pity, beloved across a continent that never once tired of hearing that question posed. Hadaway splits his time today between Austria and Germany and is still actively making music, releasing new material from a forthcoming album as recently as the past couple of years. His great hit asked a question it pointedly declined to answer, leaving every listener to scribble in the blank themselves, which may be the whole reason it endures. A song shaped like an open door. The man who sang it is comfortable, working, and still lobbing the eternal question at crowds who, decades later, are still happy to nod along and entirely fail to answer it. C&C Music Factory. Everybody dance now. It is not a suggestion. It is not an invitation. It is a command. And since 1990, rooms full of people have been snapping to attention and obeying it. A thunderous dance pop anthem driven by a rapper's hook, and above all, by a vocal of absolutely titanic force. C&C Music Factory was the production duo of Robert Clavils and David Cole, with the rapper Freedom Williams out front, and their signature track is still a pure intravenous shot of euphoria. But the full story of that record is among the most important in this entire book, because the voice that delivers that famous, soaring hook, the part that lifts every hair on your arm, did not belong to the woman shown in the video. It belonged to a powerhouse singer named Martha Wash, who was, at first, left uncredited, her enormous voice deployed while someone else's face was put on the screen. We will come back to that injustice shortly, because it ended up reshaping the industry. This chapter also carries a loss. David Cole, the brilliant half of the production team, died in 1995 of meningitis at just 32, a vast talent gone far too soon, and his death effectively closed the book on the original group. His partner Robert Clavilles is alive and still producing, and Freedom Williams is alive and still touring under the group's name, and a tangled, unresolved dispute has long simmered between them over who may rightfully claim it, which we note as a documented fact, and nothing more, taking no side. The music they made together is immortal on dance floors everywhere, and David Cole's gift is stitched into every single bar of it. Ski Low. The song opens with the most disarming wish list in 90s rap, a string of modest daydreams about being just a little taller and a little better off, delivered with so much easy charm that you find yourself rooting for the guy by the second bar. The wistful, self-deprecating reverie of 1995 earned a Grammy nomination and a permanent corner of the decade's memory. The man behind it was a Los Angeles rapper and producer named Antoine Roundtree, who recorded as Ski Low. Label troubles tripped him almost the instant his momentum began, and his output thinned for years, leaving a long, frustrating silence where a career should have been compounding, and making him a textbook case of how the business itself, and not any shortage of talent, can shelve an artist. He is doing well now, and he describes himself with evident, earned pride as a Grammy-nominated producer and MC, a father and a grandfather, running his own independent label and putting out fresh recordings after the long gap. His humble little wish list of a song found a new audience when a major brand restaged it in an ad starring a famously enormous basketball star, a knowing wink at the original's whole premise about wishing you were taller. Skilo wished, back in 1995, for a few simple things he did not have. The man telling the story today, surrounded by his family and back in command of his own music, sounds a great deal like someone who got most of what actually counted. Wigfield. The song opens on a single golden evening, the giddy anticipation of a Saturday night when the air itself seems to crackle and the whole night is still ahead of you. The Eurodance confection swept the globe in the mid-90s, complete with its own arm-waving routine, and it slipped into the record books by becoming the first single from a debut female artist to crash the British chart straight at the very top. The face and the voice belonged to a Danish singer named Sanny Carlson, working with Italian producers under the name Wigfield. She was enormous across Europe and never landed a comparable follow-up in the wider world, but she stayed a fixture of the continent's thriving dance and nostalgia circuits, never really vanishing so much as settling into a dependable groove. She is still performing today, in her mid-50s, and a few years back she returned to the Wigfield name with new material, happily walking crowds through that irresistible Saturday night choreography, the way she has for 30 years. Hers is a story free of complication, a singer who cut one of the defining party records of her era and has spent the decades since handing people exactly what they showed up for. There is a real and underrated skill in that, in becoming the trusted custodian of a song that means the start of a good night to millions, and she wears the role with the ease of a woman who long ago made peace with being a joyful one-hit wonder. Baha Men. Who Let the Dogs Out? The bark has been going up at sporting events for a quarter-century now, a Junkanoo party anthem so welded into arena culture that it fires off like a reflex anytime a crowd needs jolting awake. The Baha Men, who carried it to a Grammy and global ubiquity in 2000, were nobody's overnight act. They were a Bahamian band with roots reaching back into the 1970s, masters of their island's propulsive Junkanoo sound. That one colossal hit swallowed everything else they had ever done or would do, the familiar fate of the one-hit wonder. But it also handed them a permanent platform, a song that flatly refuses to leave the rotation at any game on earth. The band is active still, with a current lineup of vocalists and players, and recently released new songs blending their traditional Bahamian rhythms with contemporary African pop, the mark of a group still creating rather than merely touring its own past. There has always been a naughty backstory about who first wrote that famous question, a piece of music history trivia all its own, but the Baha Men are the ones who turned it into a worldwide phenomenon. They took the sound of their islands and got the entire planet shouting along, and they are out there yet, living proof that a novelty smash can rest on a foundation of deep and genuine musicianship. Lass Ketchup. The chorus is glorious nonsense, a playful sing-song scramble of a phrase that means nothing at all and was never meant to, and it became one of the finest, inescapable novelty hits of 2002, a global smash with its own dance that moved many millions of copies. The performers were 3, and later 4, sisters from Cordoba, Spain, daughters of a respected flamenco guitarist, working together as Lass Ketchup. They never recaptured that giddy worldwide moment, and a later run at a major song contest for their country fell flat, leaving them planted firmly in the territory of the one summer phenomenon. The sisters are still around, playing the occasional show and lending their famous song to remixes and features, including fresh versions in just the last couple of years that have introduced the silly, joyful thing to listeners far too young to remember it the first time. There is no shadow on this one, only the pleasant picture of a family of musicians who had one enormous, ridiculous hit and have kept it alive as a fond keepsake rather than a burden. Their song meant nothing, gloriously by design, just sound and rhythm and the pure pleasure of a chorus you cannot help mangling along with. And the women who made it seem entirely content to stay its cheerful keepers. "Right," said Fred. The song struts in on pure deadpan vanity, the singer gravely informing the world that he is simply too gorgeous for his own clothing, and then for every other situation he can think of. The camp of 1991 was a joke the entire world was let in on, a preening, tongue firmly in cheek strut of a record called I'm Too Sexy that hit number 1 in America and turned into permanent shorthand for vanity played strictly for laughs. The English brothers Fred and Richard Fairbrass made it, 2 muscular, bald, knowingly ridiculous figures who understood exactly how funny they were being and timed every wink to land. They were always bigger as a novelty and a touring proposition than as a long-haul chart force, settling comfortably into the role of reliable nostalgia circuit entertainers, armed with one of pop's most quotable hooks. Their song found a remarkable second life when one of the biggest stars on the planet built a hit of her own around a sample of it, an unexpected windfall that refreshed both their royalties and their profile for a whole new generation. The brothers stay active today, headlining nostalgia festivals and touring Europe and America, still leaning hard into the same self-aware comedy that made them. Theirs was never a song that asked to be taken seriously, which is precisely the genius of it, and more than 30 years on the joke still lands clean, a deadpan little anthem of mock vanity that turned two cheerfully absurd brothers into permanent pop fixtures. Aqua! The song opens on a chirpy, cartoonish exchange, a doll-like voice introducing herself as a creature of plastic and her plastic little universe, and a deeper voice answering right back. The bubblegum call and response was utterly inescapable in 1997, a candy-colored Europop confection called Barbie Girl, so brazen that the toy company it name-checked tried, and spectacularly failed, to sue it clean out of existence. The Danish-Norwegian group Aqua made it, fronted by the cheerfully bickering voices of Lene Nystrom and René Diff, and for a year or two they were a living cartoon the whole world simply could not switch off. Nothing they did afterward traveled nearly as far, and the band split, reunited, and worked the European festival circuit for years as the gleefully plastic ambassadors of their one enormous hit. When a blockbuster film about that very doll arrived a few years back, their song came roaring straight back into the culture, as silly and irresistible as the day it was born. Their present-day chapter closed just recently, and entirely on their own terms. In the spring of 2026, Aqua announced they were retiring as a touring band, having played their final show late the year before, choosing to shut the door while the memories were still bright, rather than let them dim slowly over time. No feud, no tragedy, just a group of old friends deciding, after nearly 30 years, that the party had run its happy course. They handed the world one of pop's most defiantly disposable singles, watched it stubbornly refuse to be thrown away, and strolled off while crowds were still hollering for more, which may well be the wisest exit anyone in this entire book ever made. Eiffel 65. The hook is a sing-song burst of color and near gibberish, a narrator cheerfully declaring himself the color blue, while a string of playful, almost nonsense syllables bounces along beneath it. It means almost nothing, and yet in 1999 it lodged itself permanently in the skull of the whole planet, a giddy Italian dance track about the color blue that sold many millions and has never quite drained out of the internet's bloodstream. Eiffel 65 were a trio out of Turin, built around the singer Jeffrey J., the keyboardist Maurizio Lobina, and the producer Gabri Ponte. They never conjured that worldwide novelty a second time, and the group eventually slimmed down when Ponte stepped away to chase his own path as a club DJ, while Jay and Lobina carried the Eiffel 65 name forward between the two of them. All three are alive, well, and still working in music, a tidy outcome for a band the world had written off as a one-off lark. Jay and Lobina marked their famous song's 25th anniversary with fresh live activity, and the track itself keeps hauling in hundreds of millions of streams from listeners far too young to have caught it the first time around. Ponte, for his part, climbed to an unlikely new summit, representing a tiny European nation on the continent's biggest song contest stage just last year. The little blue song everyone treated as a gag revealed itself to be a remarkably durable export, and the men who made it have each, in their own direction, kept the music playing. Len flipped the channel to a perfect summer afternoon. Steal My Sunshine arrived in 1999 like the last warm day of the century. A loose, sample-soaked shuffle tossed back and forth between a brother and sister, and it became the carefree anthem of its season. The Canadian act, Len was essentially the siblings Mark and Sharon Costanzo, and that one golden single was their whole moment in the wider sun. No follow-up of any real size ever turned up, and Mark eventually folded the project, drifting into quieter, behind-the-scenes work in the music business rather than scrapping for a comeback that was never going to materialize. What is striking about him now is just how thoroughly at peace he seems. By his own account, Mark Costanzo found a steady, low-profile job in the industry he loves, with no regrets about the road not taken, and he still surfaces to play the old hit every so often, sitting in with a younger band a couple of years back to perform it. The song keeps finding new life, recently covered by another 90s group for a fresh generation. His sister has stayed well clear of the spotlight, living a private life away from all of it. Theirs is a gentle, unbothered ending. Two siblings who caught one perfect ray of summer, let it warm a whole season, and then quietly got on with their lives, content to have made something people still reach for whenever the weather turns fine. The voice you never saw. We have to stop here and tell the truth about the dance floor. Some of the most powerful voices of the entire era were never once allowed to show their faces. The hook on that C&C Music Factory anthem, the one that hauls the whole song up into the rafters, was sung by Martha Wash, a singer of monumental gifts who was initially left off the credits altogether, while a slimmer, more conventionally marketable performer was filmed lip-syncing her work in the video, and it was no isolated sleight of hand. The defining hip house hit Pump Up the Jam was fronted on camera by a model, while the actual rapping and singing came from an artist named Ya Kid K, who went uncredited at first. The Eurodance classic, The Rhythm of the Night, put one woman in front of the lens, while the soaring lead vocal had been recorded by another, a singer named Jenny B, kept carefully out of sight. There is a pattern here, and it is not a flattering one. The industry decided that certain voices were good enough to sell millions of records, but not the right look to be seen selling them, and so it sawed the artist in two, bolting one woman's face onto another woman's genius. The deception ran so wide, and Martha Wash fought back so fiercely that it helped force genuine change. Record labels were eventually required to properly credit the vocalists on their tracks, a reform owed in large part to the very women who refused to be erased. So when we ask where they are now, we ought to ask, too, where they were then, tucked just off camera, their voices flooding stadiums while their names were left off the sleeve. Some wrongs take years to set right, but the voices in the end are what survived. And every time one of those anthems plays, it is the unseen singer, not the face in the video, that you are actually hearing. The truth outlasted the trick. It usually does. The new millennium. The hit kept mutating. As the century rolled over, the number of ways a song could swallow the world multiplied past counting, from the last flickering reign of radio and music television into the strange new machinery of the internet, where a record could lie quiet in its grave for a decade and then claw its way back to life on a platform that did not even exist when somebody first pressed record. The newest wonders gathered in these pages include a man who looked a global smash in the eye and walked away from it on purpose, and a song that did the impossible and got bigger every single year it aged. We finish the way this series always finishes, with the bright stories cupped in one hand and the tender ones in the other. Lou Bega. The song rolls out a parade of women's names, one after another, each stepping forward like a guest at a party who refuses to be forgotten, every one of them granted a little corner of the narrator's affection. That swaggering roll call stands as one of the great quoted hooks of 1999, and Lou Bega built his whole irresistible hit, Mambo No. 5, on it, a horn-soaked overhaul of an old big band mambo that conquered the planet in the last summer before the millennium changed the date on everything. Born David Lubega, of Ugandan and Sicilian heritage, he arrived fully assembled, a retro lounge crooner in a white suit, all easy charm and a smile that knew exactly what it was doing. He never again touched that global altitude, but he was clever about the descent, building a steady and lucrative European touring life on the back of the one song every crowd showed up to hear, never sulking about it, always glad to give the people what they wanted. He is still out there today, still reciting that catalog of names to large and grateful rooms, with millions of monthly listeners and fresh music continuing to surface. There is a quiet wisdom tucked inside his contentment. Plenty of artists spend their whole lives at war with their biggest hit, mortified by it, hungry to be known for anything else. Lubega chose the opposite road. He threw both arms around his one perfect, ridiculous, joyful song, and it has carried him in comfort for a quarter century, a little bit of everything in his life, precisely as the song promised. Daniel Powter. Picture the song detonating gently out of a million radios at once in 2005. Soft piano like a hand on the shoulder, the whole world humming a melody designed to forgive you for a rough morning. Bad Day was the consoling ballad's name, and it got adopted as the farewell theme on a juggernaut television talent show, and from there it was inescapable, a #1 across the planet that wrapped its arms around anyone who was struggling. The man who wrote and sang it, a Canadian named Daniel Powter, knew a great deal more about hard times than that tender little tune ever let on. The crushing scale of that single, tangled together with the personal struggles running alongside it, made for a genuinely punishing stretch, and he never landed another hit on anything close to the same scale. For a time, the sheer ubiquity of his kindness anthem seemed to press down on him like a weight he had not asked to carry. His present-day story, though, is one of the quietly hopeful ones in this collection. Powter is sober now, living a private life with his family in Portland, and he has spoken with real candor about the addiction and the dark underside of his overnight fame, framing all of it not as wreckage, but as something he walked through and out the other side of. He auditioned for a talent show himself recently and announced new material in 2025. We honor his own openness and leave the hard details exactly where he chose to set them down. The man who wrote the world's most famous song about a bad day has, by his own telling, finally stitched together a long, unbroken run of good ones. Wheatus. A single name lands in the very first line, a girl's name, and you are slammed straight back into the cafeteria, the longing, the low-grade humiliation of being 17 and invisible. The opening of Teenage Dirtbag drops you instantly into all of it, and the 2000 song by the Long Island band Wheatus, led by the singer Brendan Brown, has grown into one of the most beloved anthems of teenage outsiderhood ever committed to tape. What makes it remarkable is the part that came after, because this is one of those rare cases where the hit did not fade at all. It grew, year after year, carried first by films and then by a wildfire of use across social media. The song kept finding fresh battalions of teenagers who heard themselves in it, until it was vastly more famous than it had ever been when it was new. The band, rather than hardening into a nostalgia act, became something closer to a slow-burning institution. Wheatus is busy and adored today, having spent the past year touring relentlessly to mark the 25th anniversary of their debut, playing the album front to back for devoted crowds across Britain, Ireland, and well beyond, with more dates and a new record on the way. And in a sign of just how far the song's reach now extends, one of the biggest pop stars on the planet, climbed on stage beside Brown to sing it not long ago. The Dirtbag anthem that once looked like a modest little novelty has aged into a genuine classic, and its makers, far from being left in its dust, have been carried steadily upward on its long, strange, rising tide. Afroman. The list begins, and the excuses pile up one on top of the next, an entire life quietly going off the rails in rhyme, every missed obligation pinned on the same lazy, smiling culprit. The cheerfully self-sabotaging stoner anthem of 2001, Because I Got High, ticked off, verse by verse, every single thing its narrator failed to do, and it became a comedy soundtrack, fixture, and a Grammy-nominated novelty smash for the rapper Joseph Foreman, who performs as Afroman. The world had its laugh and moved along, certain the joke came with an expiration date. He kept grinding on the independent circuit for years, off the mainstream radar but never standing still, and then his story took a swerve nobody alive could have written for him, the kind that hauled him back into the headlines through the strangest possible door. After his home was raided by sheriff's deputies in an operation that turned up no charges at all, Afroman took his own security footage and built music videos out of it, gently roasting the entire episode. And when some of those deputies turned around and sued him, he won, a jury siding with him on the bedrock principle of free speech, and his catalog surged on the back of the vindication. Now in his 50s, he describes himself as standing at the highest point of his career, and the claim is genuinely hard to dispute. The man the culture once waved off as a one-joke novelty turned a real ordeal into a free speech triumph and a creative second wind, proving that the hapless narrator of his famous song, the one who never managed to finish anything, was never really him in the first place. Gotye. Start with the xylophone, that small, bright knock, and then the ache, and then the duet, climbing toward a shared, wounded howl that an entire generation knows in its bones, the sound of two ex-lovers turning a breakup into an argument set to music. Somebody that I used to know was a generation-defining global phenomenon in 2011, a Grammy-sweeping #1 that seemed, for one full year, to be leaking out of every room on Earth. The man behind it, a Belgian-Australian musician named Wally de Backer, who recorded as Gotye, stood at the absolute peak of pop music. And then he did the single most unusual thing in this entire book. He climbed down from it on purpose. Rather than scramble after a follow-up to one of the biggest songs of the century, de Backer deliberately retired the Gotye name, and the pop stardom bolted to it, having decided that the great roaring engine of fame was simply not how he wanted to spend his one life. This was no flameout, no slow collapse. It was a choice, made with clear eyes. What he does now is the loveliest answer to where are they now that these pages have to give. He moved with his family to the south of France, and he pours himself into a passion project of real and unexpected beauty, running a nonprofit devoted to restoring and preserving rare, forgotten early electronic instruments, rescuing the peculiar machines that first taught music how to sing with electricity. He reunited with his old band for fresh recordings and launched a tribute to a pioneer of electronic sound. He held the whole world's attention in his hand, and he gently handed it back, swapping superstardom for a workshop crowded with antique synthesizers and a quiet life of careful preservation. Of everyone in these pages, he may be the only one who stood on the mountaintop, looked around at all of it, and decided, with perfect calm, that he would simply rather be somewhere else. Not every story lands soft. We have saved the hardest truth for near the very end. because honesty leaves us no other place to put it. Not every story in this genre closes warm. For all the reinventions and reunions, the professorships and the producing careers, the goat farms and the law offices, there are people who handed us a song we love and then could not find their own way through the dark, who wrestled with addiction or illness, or the strange hollowing pressure of having peaked young and in public and never quite the same again. The rap rock band Crazy Town gave the new century one of its biggest songs, a #1 called Butterfly, and their frontman, who performed as Shifty Shellshock, spent the years that followed in a long and visible fight with addiction, a fight he ultimately did not win. He died in 2024 at 49. We say it plainly, and we say it softly, and we set the painful particulars aside, because a man is not the manner of his death. He is the song he gave us, and the people who loved him, and we wish his memory peace. This is the part of the work that asks the most of us. It would be easier by far to tell only the triumphant ones, to assemble a whole book out of goat farmers and guitar makers and secret hit machine songwriters hiding in everyone else's credits. But that would be a lie about what fame actually costs the people who pay for it, and these people deserve the truth a great deal more than they deserve a tidy ending. Some of them came through the fire, like the man in Portland who got sober and started counting his good days one at a time. Some of them did not. Both kinds of story are real, and both kinds of person gave us something we are still carrying around. So when one of these songs comes on, the ones now attached to a name we have lost, let it land a little differently in you. Let it be not only the memory of a summer, but a small, deliberate act of remembrance for the person who made it, who was, always, and without exception, a great deal more than the 4 minutes by which we knew them. A word for the listener. Here is what all of this has taught me, walking slowly through these lives. We were unfair to them, in a small and thoughtless way, every one of us. We took people who pulled off the nearly impossible feat of making a song the whole world would commit to memory, and we shrank them down to a punchline, a trivia answer, a name forever stuck on the tip of the tongue. One-hit wonder, we said, as though we were handing down a verdict. And then we never once wondered, truly wondered, where on earth they had gone. Now you know where. They went everywhere. Into goat farms and law offices and university classrooms, into the producer's chair where the next generation's hits are quietly born, into recovery and into grief, into easy contentment and into workshops full of antique machines humming back to life. They grew up the same way the rest of us did, right out of the frame the camera had frozen them in, and they built lives far larger and stranger and richer than the single song we filed them under and forgot about. The hit was never the whole story. It was only ever the part we happened to be watching. So the next time one of these songs comes looking for you in a grocery aisle or a car or the middle of a memory, do 2 things. Sing it, loud and unashamed, the way you always have. And then, just for one moment, spare a thought for the person who gave it to you, who is out there somewhere right now, older and wiser, and still, somehow, the author of a thing you will carry to the end of your days. They earned that much. They earned a great deal more than that. Thank you for taking this walk back with us, and for being a little kinder, from here on out, to the strangers whose songs you know by heart. We will see you on the next one. Books by Barron. Where are they now? A note on respect in language. This book was written with care for the people in it, where lives included addiction, illness, legal trouble, or loss. Those chapters were told with restraint and without sensationalism, referencing the public facts only as far as the story honestly required and no further. Where someone has spoken openly and on the record about their own struggles, we have honored their framing and let their own words set the terms. Contested or disputed matters were identified as contested, and this narrator did not sit in judgment of them. Those who have died were remembered as people first, never reduced to the manner of their passing. The intent throughout was simple: to treat artists who gave the world something lasting with the dignity that gift deserves. A note on sources. Everything in this book was drawn from publicly available information, including interviews, reputable news reporting, official artist statements, and standard reference records. Present-day details, where the artists are and what they are doing now, were checked against recent public sources at the time of writing. The world keeps turning after any book is finished, and statuses change, so some details may have moved on by the time you hear this. Nothing here was invented. Where the public record was uncertain, the uncertainty was left honestly in place, rather than filled in with guesswork. About the Where Are They Now series. Where Are They Now is a series about the people who once lived on our screens and our radios, and the lives they led after the spotlight moved on. Each episode follows a category of the once famous and asks the question time always leaves behind. The aim is never to gawk and never to mock, but to look back with warmth, curiosity, and respect at the people who gave us the moments we still carry, and to find out, honestly and tenderly, where the years have taken them. If you enjoyed this walk back, there are more episodes waiting and more to come. Disclosure. This program is an independent work of biography and commentary produced by Books by Barron and written by Baron Darby. It was created using publicly available information. It is not authorized, endorsed by, or affiliated with any of the artists profiled, or with their families, estates, record labels, management, or representatives. Any analysis or interpretation offered here is the author's own commentary. All names, song titles, and trademarks remain the property of their respective owners and are used here only for the purposes of commentary, criticism, and historical discussion. We have made every effort to be accurate and respectful, and corrections to any factual matter are genuinely welcomed. Written by Baron Darby. Narrated by Jessica Ann Bogart.